Hello and welcome to the Vailrun Tapes. Every story here is true. It happened to a real person, and they wrote it down or said it out loud, so the rest of us would know. Tonight, I'll share a few of them with you. A lot of you come back here every night, and that means a lot to me. These stories stay with people. That's just what they do. Before we start, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. I read all of them. And if you like these stories, a quick like and subscribe really help. Now get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin.
My mother used to date a man who owned a small Arabic deli in Brooklyn, New York. This was back in the mid-1990s when everything still felt a little different from how it feels now. People talked on landline phones for hours. Small stores stayed open late. Neighborhood delis had their own kind of life, with regular customers coming in and out all day, workers standing behind the counter, cigarette smoke still hanging in some places, an old phone sitting near the register or on a shelf in the back. My mother and this man talked often, usually while he was working at the deli. From what I remember, their relationship was not something dramatic or unusual. He was just a man she was seeing at the time, and because he spent so much time at work, a lot of their conversations happened while he was behind the counter or taking care of things in the store. I was younger then, but I still remember certain parts of that time clearly. I remember my mother being on the phone with him, talking casually like people do when they are comfortable with each other. Sometimes she would be sitting at home while he was at the deli, and they would talk about ordinary things. Nothing strange, nothing scary, nothing that would make anyone think something impossible was about to happen. That is probably why this story stayed with me so strongly. It did not begin like a scary story. It began like a normal phone call between two people who knew each other well. One day, while they were talking, something changed on his end of the line. My mother could hear it right away. His voice shifted. He suddenly sounded frightened, confused, and panicked. It was not the kind of fear people fake for attention, and it was not the kind of mild surprise someone has when a customer walks in unexpectedly. From the way my mother reacted, it sounded like he had seen something that made his whole body freeze for a second before panic took over. My mother started asking him what was wrong. She kept saying his name and asking what had happened. At first, he would not explain. Maybe he could not explain. Maybe his mind was still trying to understand what he was looking at. All she could hear was him freaking out, breathing hard and speaking in broken pieces. She became scared too because she was stuck on the other side of the phone and had no idea what was happening in that deli. She could not see him. She could not help him. She could only hear his fear. Finally, all he managed to say was, "I'll call you back." Then the call ended. That alone was enough to worry her. It was not normal. He had not sounded annoyed or busy. He sounded terrified. My mother did not know if someone had come into the store with a weapon, if there had been a robbery, if someone was hurt, or if something else had happened that he could not say out loud. Brooklyn in the mid-90s was not exactly a place where you ignored panic from someone working alone in a deli. A lot could happen in a store like that, especially depending on the neighborhood and the time of day. So she waited. I remember her being worried. I remember that feeling in the house, that tense quiet after something strange happens and nobody knows what it means yet. She kept wondering why he had hung up so fast. She wanted him to call back, but at the same time, she was probably afraid of what he was going to say when he did. After some time, he finally called back. When he told her what had happened, it sounded so strange that it was hard to even know how to react. According to him, while he had been on the phone with her, something had appeared inside the deli. Not a person, not an animal he recognized, not a rat, not a stray cat, not a dog that wandered in from the street. He described it as a strange-looking creature, something that did not seem like it belonged in the normal world at all. He said it stood on its hind legs. That detail always bothered me because it made the thing sound too aware, too unnatural. A lot of animals can lift themselves up for a moment, but the way he described it made it seem like the creature was standing there, almost like a small person, or at least like something trying to imitate a person's shape. It was not crawling around like a normal animal. It was upright. It was facing them. It was there, inside the deli, where no creature like that should have been. He said it had claws for hands, not paws, not little animal feet, but claws. He said its eyes were huge and black, the kind of black eyes that make something look empty and intelligent at the same time. He said it had a tongue like a snake, long and strange, moving in a way that made the whole thing even harder to understand. Its teeth, he said, were long like a tiger's teeth. That part made the creature sound almost impossible, like a mix of several different animals thrown together in the worst way. My mother listened to him tell the story, and I can only imagine how she must have felt. Part of her probably wanted to believe he had misunderstood what he saw. Maybe it was some injured animal. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe someone had brought something into the store. Maybe fear made him exaggerate. But he was not telling it like a joke. He was shaken. His fear was real, and that made it harder to dismiss. He said the creature seemed frightened, too. That part made the story even stranger. It was not only that he and his co-worker were scared of it. The creature itself seemed scared, like it had appeared somewhere it did not expect to be, or like it wanted to get away but did not know how. It was inside a deli in Brooklyn, surrounded by shelves, counters, lights, food, and people. If it was some kind of animal, maybe it was trapped and panicking. But if it was something else, something impossible, then maybe it was just as confused as they were. Then came the part of the story that was the hardest to believe. He said the creature somehow became small enough to fit through one of the holes of a home phone. Back then, people still used regular landline phones. The phones had little openings and gaps, depending on the kind of handset or base. The way he told it, this thing shrank down or changed in some way and went into one of those holes. It sounds ridiculous when said plainly, almost like something from a nightmare or a strange urban legend. But that was what he claimed. He said it went in, through the phone, disappeared, and then somehow appeared again. That detail has always made the story feel more like something supernatural than an ordinary encounter with an animal. An animal can run under a shelf. A rat can squeeze through a small space. A lizard can hide in a crack. But something becoming small enough to enter a phone and then coming back out is different. That is not just strange. That is impossible, unless the whole event was misunderstood, exaggerated, or belonged to a kind of reality that most people never experience. According to him, when the creature appeared again, he and the other man working with him reacted out of fear. They grabbed a bat and beat it. They were not calm. They were not trying to study it or trap it carefully. They were scared men in a small store, faced with something they believed was dangerous and unnatural. When people panic, they do not always think about what something is. They think about stopping it before it attacks them. He said they hit it with the bat until they thought it was no longer a threat. Then they put it in a black bag and kept the bag behind the deli fridge. That image has always stayed with me. A strange creature, in a black bag behind a refrigerator in a Brooklyn deli. It sounds like something from a movie, but this was told like it happened in real life. I imagine the narrow space behind the counter, the hum of the refrigerators, the smell of food and cleaning supplies, the cold metal surfaces, the old phone nearby, and these two men standing there, shaken and sweating, trying to understand what had just happened. They did not call the police, at least not from what I remember. And honestly, what would they have said? That a little monster with black eyes and tiger teeth had appeared in the store, crawled into a phone, came back out, and now they had it in a garbage bag? Even if they had called someone, no one would have believed them. They probably knew that. Maybe they thought they would throw it away quietly and never talk about it again. Maybe they were afraid people would laugh at them. Maybe they were afraid something worse would happen if they made a big deal out of it. So they left the bag behind the fridge until it was time to take out the garbage. But when that time came, the creature was gone. The black bag was still there, or at least the place where they had put it was checked, but whatever had been inside was no longer there. It had vanished. They never found it. They never saw it again. There was no body, no proof, no explanation. Just a story, a terrified phone call, and a memory that stayed with my mother and with me for years afterward. That is the hardest part about stories like this. There is nothing to hold in your hand afterward. No photograph, no police report, no newspaper article, no body kept in a jar, no physical evidence that could make a skeptical person pause. All that remains is what someone said they saw, how scared they sounded, and how the people around them reacted at the time. I know how it sounds. I know that if someone told me this story as a complete stranger, I might doubt it too. I might think the deli owner was lying, or that he and his coworker found some weird animal and their fear changed the memory into something bigger than it was. Maybe it was a large rat, or a malformed animal, or some kind of escaped exotic pet. Brooklyn has always had all kinds of strange things hidden in apartments, basements, stores, and alleys. People keep illegal pets, animals escape, things get into buildings. Fear can make eyes look bigger, teeth look longer, and movements seem unnatural. But then there is the phone part. There is the way he panicked during the call. There is my mother's reaction. She knew him. She knew his voice. She knew when he was joking and when he was serious. And she was worried, genuinely worried. That is the part I remember clearly. My mother did not treat it like a funny story at first. She was shaken by how frightened he had sounded. Even if the creature itself was not what he thought it was, something happened in that deli that scared him badly enough to hang up on her and call back later with a story he must have known sounded insane. Over the years, I have thought about it many times. I have tried to make sense of it. Maybe the whole thing was a misunderstanding. Maybe someone else in the deli saw something and reacted, and the story grew bigger in the telling. Maybe the man wanted attention. Maybe he had a strange sense of humor. Maybe there was some kind of animal in the store, and in the panic, he described it in the most terrifying way possible. Maybe the part about the phone was symbolic, or maybe I misunderstood that detail as a kid and remembered it in a more impossible way than it was originally told. But even with all those possible explanations, the memory still feels strange. It is not just the story itself. It is the feeling around it. I remember my mother being concerned. I remember the seriousness in the way it was talked about. I remember that it did not feel like someone was making up a ghost story to entertain people. It felt like something had happened that no one could comfortably explain. The fact that it happened in a deli makes it even more unsettling to me. A deli is not an abandoned house or a dark forest. It is not the kind of place where people expect supernatural things. It is bright, public, ordinary. Customers come in for sandwiches, drinks, cigarettes, coffee, newspapers, and snacks. Workers stand behind the counter and talk on the phone while slicing meat or ringing people up. It is one of the most normal places imaginable. That is what makes the idea of something impossible appearing there so disturbing. It suggests that strange things do not only happen in lonely places. They can happen under fluorescent lights, between shelves of chips and soda, while someone is having a normal conversation on the phone. I also think about the creature being frightened. If the story is true, or even partly true, then what was it? Where did it come from? Why did it appear there? Was it some kind of animal that people had never seen before? Was it something from folklore? Something that did not belong in the modern city, but somehow found its way there? Or was it something connected to fear itself? Something that showed up suddenly and vanished just as suddenly, leaving only confusion behind? There is no answer. That is probably why I still remember it. Some stories fade because they explain themselves too easily. You hear them once, you understand what happened, and then they are gone from your mind. But this one never gave me that kind of closure. It ended with the creature missing from the bag and no one ever seeing it again. That ending leaves the imagination open. Did it die and somehow get taken by someone? Did it escape behind the fridge? Did it crawl into some hole in the wall? Did it go back through the phone or through some other tiny opening? Or was there never anything in the bag by the time they looked? The mid-90s feel far away now, but that story still sits in my memory. I can still picture my mother worried after that phone call. I can still imagine the deli owner trying to explain something he barely understood himself. I can still hear, in my mind, the sudden fear of a man who was having a normal conversation one moment and facing something unbelievable the next. I do not know if the story is true. I do not know if it was exaggerated, mistaken, or exactly as he described it. Even now, it is hard for me to fully believe it. But it is also hard for me to forget it. Something about it has always felt too strange to dismiss completely. Maybe that is because the fear was real, even if the creature was not. Maybe that is enough to make a story stay with you. Whatever happened in that Brooklyn deli, it left behind no proof, no body, and no explanation. Just a phone call, a panicked voice, a black bag behind a fridge, and a creature that was there one moment and gone the next. One of the strangest stories my dad ever told me happened when he was still a teenager and had only recently learned how to drive. Even now, years later, he still swears it happened exactly the way he remembers it. My dad is not the kind of person who normally tells wild supernatural stories either. He is usually practical, calm, and the type to laugh things off instead of turning them into ghost stories. That is part of why this story always stuck with me. According to him, it happened while he and a couple of his friends were driving through a rural part of Canada, near a Native American reserve. Back then, the roads out there were mostly long stretches of gravel surrounded by forests, open land, and lakes. The kind of place where you can drive for miles without seeing another car. During the day, it looks beautiful and peaceful, but at night, those roads can feel incredibly isolated. My dad had only recently learned how to drive, so one of his friends named Jeremy was behind the wheel while my dad sat in the passenger seat. They were just young guys driving around with nothing important to do, talking nonsense, listening to music, and enjoying the freedom of finally being old enough to travel around on their own without parents watching over them. It was late evening, moving into nighttime when this happened. The road stretched ahead of them with almost no traffic around. The headlights only lit up a small part of the gravel road in front of the car while the rest disappeared into darkness. Trees lined parts of the road, and every now and then they would pass small clearings or distant cabins with barely any lights on. My dad remembers the sound first. At first he thought it was strange because it sounded like galloping. Not distant galloping either. It sounded close, really close. Like a horse was somehow running right beside the car, and that made no sense. They were already going over 40 miles per hour on a gravel road, and there was no reason for a horse to be out there matching their speed in the middle of nowhere at night. My dad said the sound was loud enough that he could hear it clearly through the open passenger side window over the noise of the car itself. Gallop, 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 fast, heavy, right beside them. At first he thought maybe another vehicle was nearby kicking up gravel in a strange rhythm, or maybe his brain was mixing sounds together. But the noise stayed perfectly alongside the car, so he leaned toward the open window and stuck his head out slightly to look. At first he did not see anything, just darkness, gravel, and the blur of the roadside rushing past. Then he glanced downward, and that was when he saw it. Running beside the car was a man on all fours. Not crawling, running, fast enough to keep pace with the vehicle. My dad always pauses for a second when he gets to this part of the story because even describing it sounds insane. According to him, the figure looked like a Native American man wearing what appeared to be a traditional feathered headdress. But the terrifying part was the way he moved. He was not moving like a normal human being. He was running on all fours, almost like an animal, except much faster and smoother than should have been possible. My dad said his arms and legs moved in this unnatural rhythm, while gravel sprayed behind him as he tore down the road beside the car. And the entire time, he kept pace with them effortlessly. Imagine seeing that for a second. You are already driving through a dark, isolated road at night, when suddenly you look down and see a person sprinting beside the vehicle, faster than most animals could run. My dad said the sight hit him with instant panic. He screamed at Jeremy to stop the car immediately, not slow down, not look over, stop. Jeremy apparently thought they were about to hit an elk or some other animal crossing the road because of how suddenly my dad yelled. He slammed on the brakes hard enough that the car skidded across the gravel before finally stopping. The second the car stopped, the galloping sound continued forward. My dad said the figure did not stumble or slow down. It just kept moving straight down the road ahead of them, still on all fours, disappearing farther into the darkness. For a few seconds, nobody inside the car said anything. All they could hear was the ticking sound of the engine and their own breathing. Jeremy started asking what happened and what my dad saw. But my dad could barely explain it properly because he himself did not fully understand what he had just looked at. He only knew one thing for certain. It was not an animal, and it definitely was not moving like a normal person. Eventually, they drove away, but my dad said the entire atmosphere inside the car changed after that. Earlier, they had been joking around and acting carefree like teenagers normally do. Afterward, nobody really felt like talking much anymore. The darkness outside suddenly felt different. Every shadow along the roadside looked wrong. Every strange sound made them tense up. My dad told me he spent years afterward trying to rationalize what happened. Maybe somebody was playing a prank somehow. Maybe exhaustion and darkness distorted what he saw. Maybe fear made his brain interpret something ordinary in a bizarre way. But there was one detail that kept bothering him: the speed. Even decades later, he insists there is no possible way a human being could have kept pace with that car on a gravel road while moving on all fours. That alone haunted him. The strangest part of the story came later, when he told his own father about it. At first, my grandfather listened quietly without interrupting much. According to my dad, he expected him to laugh it off or tell him he imagined it. Instead, after a long silence, his father told him something that completely changed the way he viewed the experience. Apparently, my grandfather had seen something similar years earlier. Back when he was younger, he had been out pike fishing alone in a canoe on a lake near another rural road. It was daytime during his experience, not night, which somehow makes it even stranger. He had been sitting quietly in the canoe when he suddenly heard a loud galloping sound coming from the nearby road. At first, he assumed someone nearby was riding a horse, but when he looked toward the road, he saw a man running on all fours, fast, unnaturally fast. My grandfather described it almost the same way my dad later would. A Native American figure, moving like an animal, arms and legs pounding against the ground hard enough to create the sound of galloping hooves. And according to him, the thing was moving faster than a horse. That detail terrified my dad when he first heard it because it meant his experience was not completely unique. His father had seen something nearly identical years earlier, without either of them knowing about the other story beforehand. Stories like that tend to stay in families. Even if people do not fully believe them, they linger in the back of your mind because there is something deeply unsettling about separate people describing almost the exact same impossible thing. As I got older, I started hearing stories connected to Native American folklore and legends from different parts of Canada and the United States. Stories about spirits, shapeshifters, beings that mimic animals or humans, and things travelers were warned not to follow into the woods. Some people immediately connect stories like my dad's to legends like skinwalkers or other supernatural creatures from indigenous traditions. But honestly, my dad himself never tried putting a label on what he saw. He never claimed it was definitely paranormal. He only claimed it happened. And sometimes I think that uncertainty makes the story scarier, because there is no explanation at the end. No clear answer, just the image of something impossible running alongside a moving car in the middle of nowhere. The part that always creeps me out most is imagining the sound itself. That steady galloping, keeping perfect pace beside the car. At first normal enough to mistake for a horse, then slowly becoming horrifying once you realize there should not be anything out there at all. And then finally looking down and seeing something human-shaped, moving in a way no human being should ever move. The human body is familiar to us. We instinctively know how people are supposed to run, walk, and move. So when something looks human but moves wrong, it immediately triggers this deep, uncomfortable fear in the brain. That is exactly why the story stayed with my dad all these years. Even now, if somebody brings it up around him, he still gets this serious look on his face while telling it. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just uncomfortable. Like part of him still wishes he had never looked out that window. And honestly, if I had seen what he described, I probably would feel the same way. Back when I was in 8th grade, my English teacher told our class a story that honestly stuck with me far longer than anything we actually learned from the textbook that year. He was not trying to scare us in some dramatic, campfire story kind of way either. In fact, the way he told it made it feel even more disturbing because he sounded completely serious the entire time. He told it like someone remembering a moment that could have changed his entire life if only a few small decisions had gone differently. The story had happened years before he became a teacher, back when he was much younger. I cannot remember exactly how old he said he was, but I think he was either in college or just a few years older. It was during a time when hitchhiking was still a little more common in some places. People still occasionally picked strangers up on highways without immediately assuming they were dangerous serial killers. According to him, he had been driving alone late one afternoon on a long stretch of road outside town. It was one of those lonely highways with gas stations scattered far apart and miles of empty road between them. The weather was cloudy, and traffic was light enough that he sometimes drove several minutes without seeing another car. Eventually, he noticed a hitchhiker standing on the side of the road. The guy looked rough, but not completely unusual. He had long hair, worn clothes, and a guitar case resting beside him. My teacher said the guitar case was one of the reasons he felt less nervous about stopping. Something about it made the guy seem more normal, almost harmless in a way. A traveling musician, maybe just some broke guy trying to get from one town to another. So he pulled over. The hitchhiker thanked him quietly, picked up the guitar case, and climbed into the passenger seat. Right away, though, my teacher said something felt off. Not obviously dangerous at first, just uncomfortable. The guy barely spoke after getting into the car. Most hitchhikers at least make small talk. They tell you where they are heading, ask where you are from, or try to make conversation so the ride feels less awkward. But according to my teacher, this guy mostly just sat there, silently holding the guitar case, upright between his legs. At one point, my teacher asked where he was headed. The guy gave a vague answer that basically meant nowhere specific. That alone made things feel stranger. As the drive continued, the silence inside the car became heavier and heavier. My teacher said he kept trying to tell himself he was overthinking things, but something about the man's behavior kept putting him on edge. The hitchhiker never acted openly threatening. He did not say anything creepy. He did not make sudden movements. But he had this intense quietness that made every mile feel uncomfortable. The guitar case also started bothering him after a while, not because he thought there was definitely a weapon inside it, but because the man never once let go of it. He held on to it, the entire drive almost protectively, and whenever the car hit bumps in the road, he adjusted his grip immediately, like he was worried about it moving. My teacher started regretting stopping for him. The longer they drove together, the more trapped he felt. It is strange how quickly a car can start feeling small when you are alone with somebody who makes you nervous. He said he kept imagining different scenarios in his head while trying not to look paranoid. What if this guy was dangerous? What if he had stolen something? What if there was not actually a guitar inside that case? At some point, my teacher decided he wanted the man out of the car without creating a confrontation. Eventually, they came across a gas station, and my teacher used it as an excuse. He pulled in and casually told the hitchhiker that he was stopping nearby anyway and could not drive him any farther. He tried to sound normal and relaxed while saying it because he did not want the guy getting angry or suspicious. According to him, the hitchhiker just nodded. No argument, no visible reaction. He quietly picked up the guitar case, got out of the car, and walked into the gas station. My teacher said the moment the passenger door closed, he immediately felt relief. Not relief because something bad had happened, but relief because the strange tension inside the car was finally gone. So he drove away. That should have been the end of the story. A weird, uncomfortable encounter with a hitchhiker that eventually became nothing more than an awkward memory. But the next day changed everything. My teacher said he was watching the news or maybe reading the newspaper when he saw a report about a shooting at a gas station along the exact highway he had been driving the day before. The same gas station. At first, he probably just thought it was an unfortunate coincidence. Then they described the suspect. Long hair, traveler, carrying a guitar case. That was when he realized exactly who it was. According to the report, after my teacher left, the hitchhiker went inside the gas station and at some point pulled a shotgun out of the guitar case. He shot the cashier during what was either a robbery or some kind of confrontation before fleeing afterward. My teacher said hearing that made him physically sick, not only because someone had been killed, but because he suddenly realized how close he himself might have come to becoming another victim. He had spent who knows how long alone in a car with a man carrying a hidden shotgun only a few feet away from him. And he never knew. That detail is what always made the story stick in my head. The shotgun had been there the entire time, while they sat in silence, while they drove down empty roads, while my teacher nervously tried making conversation. The whole time, there was a loaded weapon sitting inches away inside what looked like an ordinary guitar case. When he told us the story in class, the room went completely quiet afterward. Usually, middle school kids joke around constantly. But nobody interrupted him during that part. I think everybody was imagining the same thing. What if he had kept driving longer? What if the hitchhiker had decided not to wait until the gas station? What if my teacher had said something wrong or acted suspicious? It is terrifying how random survival can sometimes be. My teacher said the experience completely changed the way he viewed strangers and gut instincts afterward. He was not trying to make some dramatic political point about hitchhiking or tell us never to trust anybody again. He even admitted that most hitchhikers probably were harmless people, just trying to get somewhere. But he also said there are moments in life where your instincts start warning you quietly before your brain fully understands why. That uncomfortable silence in the car, the way the man held onto the guitar case, the vague answers, the tension. At the time, my teacher could not explain exactly why he felt nervous. He only knew he wanted the man out of the car as soon as possible. And that decision may very well have saved his life. The older I get, the scarier the story becomes to me because it feels so realistic. There is nothing supernatural about it. No ghosts, no monsters. Just an ordinary person trying to help someone on the side of the road and unknowingly ending up inches away from real violence. Those are the kinds of stories that stay with you because they remind you how little you sometimes know about the strangers around you. You can sit next to someone for an hour, exchange a few words, maybe even feel bad for them, while having absolutely no idea what they are capable of. And sometimes the scariest thing is realizing how close danger can get before you even recognize it. One of the strangest stories my dad ever told me happened back when he was still young and had only recently learned how to drive. Even now, after all these years, he still swears it happened exactly the way he remembers it. My dad is not someone who normally talks about ghosts, monsters, or supernatural stuff either. He is usually practical and skeptical about those kinds of stories, which honestly makes this one even creepier to me. According to him, it happened while he and a couple of his friends were driving through a rural part of Canada, near a Native American reserve. Back then, the roads out there were mostly long gravel stretches, cutting through forests, lakes, and open land with barely any houses around. The kind of roads where you can drive for miles without seeing another person. During the daytime, those areas look beautiful, but at night, they feel isolated in a way that is hard to explain, unless you have actually been somewhere that empty before. My dad had only recently gotten comfortable driving, so his friend Jeremy was the one behind the wheel that night, while my dad sat in the passenger seat. They were just young guys driving around with nothing important to do, talking, joking, and enjoying the freedom that comes with finally being old enough to go wherever you want without parents hovering over you. It was already getting dark outside. The sun had mostly disappeared, leaving that deep blue-gray light where everything starts looking colder and stranger. The headlights from the car only lit up a small section of the gravel road ahead, while the rest vanished into darkness. Trees lined parts of the road, and every now and then they would pass an opening where a lake reflected faint moonlight through the woods. At first, everything felt normal. Then my dad heard something outside. He said it sounded exactly like galloping. Not far away either. Close. Really close. At first he thought maybe another vehicle was making a strange noise on the gravel road, but the sound stayed perfectly beside them. Gallop. 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 Fast and heavy, like a horse sprinting right alongside the car. The strange thing was they were already going over 40 miles per hour. There should not have been anything keeping pace with them out there, especially not on those rough roads. My dad said the sound was loud enough that he could clearly hear it through the open passenger side window of the noise of the engine and gravel. The more he listened, the more unsettled he became. There is something deeply unnatural about hearing hoofbeats matching your speed in the middle of nowhere at night when you know there should not be a horse anywhere nearby. Eventually, curiosity got the better of him, and he leaned toward the open window to look outside. At first, he saw nothing, just darkness, trees, and gravel flying by. Then he glanced downward, and that was when he saw it. Running directly beside the car was a man moving on all fours. Not crawling, not stumbling, running, fast enough to easily keep up with the vehicle. Even years later, my dad struggles to properly explain what he saw because his brain still does not fully accept it. According to him, the figure looked like a Native American man wearing what appeared to be a traditional feathered headdress. But the truly horrifying part was the way he moved. He was moving like an animal. His hands and feet slammed against the gravel road with impossible speed, while his body stayed low and smooth, almost unnaturally balanced. Gravel sprayed behind him as he ran beside the car effortlessly. And the entire time, he never fell behind. Imagine seeing something like that unexpectedly. 1 second, you are just riding through dark, rural roads with your friends, and the next second you look down and see a human-shaped figure sprinting beside the vehicle, faster than most animals could move. My dad said pure panic hit him instantly. He screamed at Jeremy to stop the car, not slow down. Stop. Jeremy apparently thought an elk or some other large animal had run onto the road because of how suddenly my dad yelled. He slammed on the brakes hard enough that the tires skidded across the gravel while everybody inside the car got thrown forward slightly. The moment the car stopped, the galloping sound kept going. My dad said the figure never even slowed down. It just continued running straight down the road ahead of them, still on all fours, disappearing deeper into the darkness until they could not see it anymore. For several seconds, nobody inside the car spoke. Jeremy kept asking what happened and what my dad had seen, but my dad was so shaken up, he could barely explain it properly. He only knew one thing for sure. It was not an animal. And no normal human being could move like that. Eventually, they started driving again, but according to my dad, the mood inside the car completely changed after that. Earlier, they had been joking around like normal teenagers. Now nobody felt much like talking anymore. Every shadow along the roadside suddenly looked threatening. Every strange sound made them tense up. The darkness outside felt different after seeing that. My dad spent years afterward trying to come up with some logical explanation. Maybe his eyes played tricks on him in the darkness. Maybe it was a person somehow moving in a way that looked strange from the angle of the car. Maybe fear exaggerated what he thought he saw. But there was one thing he could never explain away: the speed. Even now, decades later, he insists there is absolutely no way a person could keep pace with a moving car on loose gravel while running on all fours. That alone stayed with him. The creepiest part of the story came later when he told his own father about it. At first, my grandfather listened quietly without reacting much. My dad expected him to laugh it off or say he imagined things. Instead, after a long silence, his father admitted he had seen something similar years earlier. Back when my grandfather was younger, he had been out pike fishing alone on a canoe beside a rural road near a lake. It was daytime during his experience, which somehow makes the story even more unsettling. He had been quietly fishing when he suddenly heard the sound of galloping coming from the nearby road. At first, he assumed somebody was riding a horse. But when he looked toward the road, he saw a man running on all fours. Fast. Far too fast. According to my grandfather, the figure moved almost exactly the way my dad later described. Arms and legs pounding against the ground hard enough to sound like hooves, while moving at impossible speed down the road. And according to him, it was moving faster than a horse. That detail really disturbed my dad when he first heard it, because he had never told his father exactly what he saw before hearing that story. Yet somehow both of them described almost the exact same thing years apart. Stories like that tend to stay in families. Even if people try not to think about them too much, they linger in the back of your mind because there is something deeply unsettling about multiple people describing the same impossible experience independently. As I got older, I started hearing about different legends and stories tied to remote parts of Canada and native folklore. Stories about spirits, shapeshifters, and creatures connected to isolated roads and forests. Some people immediately jump to things like skinwalkers or other supernatural beings when they hear stories like this. But honestly, my dad never tried to give what he saw a name. He never claimed it was definitely paranormal. He only claimed it happened. And weirdly enough, I think that uncertainty makes the story scarier. There is no explanation at the end, no neat answer. Just the image of something human-shaped moving in a way no human body should ever move while keeping pace beside a speeding car in the middle of nowhere. The part that always creeps me out most is imagining the sound itself. That steady galloping matching the speed of the car perfectly. At first, almost normal. Then, slowly becoming terrifying once you realize there should not be anything out there beside you at all. And then finally looking down and seeing a human figure sprinting beside the road like some kind of animal. There is something deeply unsettling about things that look almost human, but move wrong. Our brains instinctively recognize how people are supposed to walk and run. So when something breaks those rules, fear hits immediately on a primal level. That is exactly why this story stayed with my dad all these years. Even now, whenever he tells it, there is this uncomfortable seriousness in his voice. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just genuine unease. Like a part of him still wishes he had never looked out that window in the first place. When I was younger, my mom used to tell me and my cousins a story that honestly sounded more like one of those made-up warnings adults invent to scare kids into behaving. You know the kind of stories parents tell so children stop doing something dangerous without needing a long explanation. At the time, we never took it seriously. We thought it was just another "be careful" or "something bad will happen" story adults repeated because they worried too much. The name she always used was Holly Jones. Whenever me and my cousins wandered too far or started cutting through garages and alleyways around the neighborhood, my mom would immediately bring her up. She would tell us to stop walking through garages or side paths alone because something could happen, and then mention Holly Jones as an example. According to her, Holly Jones was a little girl who got abducted and murdered while walking her friend home. That was usually enough to make us quiet down for maybe 5 minutes before going right back to doing whatever we wanted. The thing is, we were kids, and kids have this weird sense of invincibility where bad things always feel distant and unreal, especially if you grow up in what seems like a safe area. Back then, between around 2006 and 2010, me and my cousins were probably around 10 years old. We spent huge amounts of time outside. We walked everywhere, rode bikes around the neighborhood, cut through garages and alleyways to save time, and wandered farther than our parents probably realized. To us, those garages and narrow paths felt almost adventurous. There is something about being a kid where shortcuts become part of your world. Alleyways feel mysterious instead of dangerous. Garages and side paths feel like secret routes only kids know about. We would run through them laughing, racing each other, or trying to get somewhere faster without thinking twice about it. And honestly, the neighborhood really did feel safe. That was part of why we ignored my mom's warnings so easily. Nothing bad had ever happened to us personally. The streets were familiar. We recognized neighbors. People walked dogs outside. Kids played basketball in driveways. It never felt like the kind of place where something terrible could happen. So whenever my mom brought up Holly Jones, we mostly rolled our eyes. To us, it sounded almost fictional. Like a cautionary tale adults passed around to scare children indoors before dark. The older people got more serious whenever they talked about it, but as kids we barely paid attention to that part. We were too young to fully understand what they were actually afraid of. I still remember the way my mom would say it sometimes. "Stop going through those garages or you'll disappear like Holly Jones." At the time, hearing that honestly annoyed us more than scared us. We thought she was exaggerating because parents always exaggerate dangers when you are young. Every stranger is dangerous. Every dark street is unsafe. Every shortcut is somehow the worst possible decision you could make. So we kept doing it anyway. Looking back now, I realize how different things probably felt from an adult perspective. Because when you are a parent, especially after hearing about child abductions or murders on the news, your brain starts imagining worst-case scenarios constantly. Places kids see as harmless suddenly look dangerous. Empty alleyways become potential hiding spots. Quiet garages become places where nobody would hear someone scream. But as children, we never saw any of that. We just saw shortcuts. The strange part is that for years, I honestly thought Holly Jones was either heavily exaggerated or maybe not even real at all. I knew the name because my mom repeated it enough times, but I never actually looked into it. I assumed maybe there had been some local story years earlier that parents turned into a warning over time. Then, sometime around last year, I randomly came across information about the real case. And that was the moment the whole thing suddenly became disturbing in a completely different way. Because Holly Jones was real. Not just real, but horrifyingly real. She was an actual little girl from Toronto who had been abducted and murdered while out walking near her neighborhood. Suddenly, this thing that had always existed in my mind as some vague, scary story became connected to a real child, a real family, and a real tragedy that genuinely terrified parents across the city. That realization honestly hit me harder than I expected, partly because it changed how I remembered my childhood. Looking back, I suddenly understood why adults reacted the way they did whenever we disappeared down garages or wandered off too far. To us, those paths felt normal and harmless. To parents who remembered stories like Holly Jones, they probably looked terrifying, especially because the case happened in Toronto. That is another thing that makes it unsettling. If you hear about crimes happening far away, they feel distant somehow. But when something horrible happens in the same city where you grew up, it changes the atmosphere of familiar places. Suddenly, those ordinary residential streets and alleyways do not feel completely innocent anymore. What really stayed with me afterward was realizing how deeply events like that affect entire generations of parents. Kids usually move on quickly from scary news stories because they do not fully understand them. Adults do not. Adults carry those fears for years afterward. I think my mom and other parents around that time genuinely were terrified whenever children wandered around unsupervised because they remembered what happened to Holly Jones. They remembered the news coverage, the fear spreading through neighborhoods, and the realization that something terrible could happen even in places that seemed perfectly safe. And honestly, they were probably right to worry. That realization is uncomfortable because as children, we often assume our parents are overprotective for no reason. But sometimes their fears come from real events they lived through or witnessed happening nearby. When I think back now, I can picture all those garages and narrow alleyways we used to cut through so casually. During the daytime, they looked harmless. Garbage bins, fences, parked cars, maybe someone working in their backyard nearby. But at night, or when they were empty, those same places suddenly seem completely different in memory. Narrow, quiet, hidden from the main street. The kind of places where parents would absolutely panic, knowing their kids were wandering around alone. I think that is what unsettled me most after learning Holly Jones was real. It changed those old childhood memories slightly. Not enough to ruin them, but enough to make me realize how vulnerable kids actually are without understanding it themselves. Because when you are 10 years old, danger feels abstract. You think bad things happen somewhere else, to other people, in other neighborhoods, not where you live, not while you are just walking around with your cousins on a normal afternoon. But adults know better. Adults understand that terrible things can happen in ordinary places during completely normal moments. That is why my mom kept bringing Holly Jones up over and over again. Not because she wanted to scare us for fun, because she genuinely worried. And honestly, now that I am older, I completely understand why. Back when I was in my senior year of college, I got involved with a guy who, looking back now, was probably one of the biggest mistakes I made during that time in my life. He was much older than me and was in grad school while I was still finishing undergrad. At first, I ignored a lot of the weirdness around him because everything felt casual and uncomplicated. He was attractive, confident, and honestly, the sex was fun enough that I convinced myself his strange behavior was just awkwardness or personality quirks. That was probably my first mistake. From the beginning, there were little things that felt slightly off. Nothing dramatic enough to make me panic immediately, but enough that if I had listened to my instincts properly, I probably would have backed away much sooner. He got attached very quickly. After barely a week of hooking up, he asked me if I wanted to be exclusive with him. A week. I remember being surprised by how intense he sounded when he asked. We barely knew each other. We had not gone on actual dates, had not spent meaningful time together outside of sleeping together. And honestly, I was not looking for a relationship at all at the time, so I told him no. Not rudely, just honestly. I said I was not ready for anything serious and reminded him that we had literally only known each other for about a week. He acted like he understood, but I remember the mood changing slightly after that conversation. Things continued casually for a little while longer, but eventually I decided I wanted to stop hooking up with him altogether. There was no huge fight or dramatic breakup. I simply realized I was uncomfortable with how attached and intense he seemed compared to how casual things were supposed to be. Again, he acted like he accepted it, at least on the surface. A little while later, after midterms, me and a few friends decided to go out drinking to celebrate finally being done with exams. Somehow I ended up inviting him too. Looking back, I know that probably sounds like a terrible decision after already ending things. But at the time, I genuinely thought we could handle it like mature adults. I figured maybe we could transition into being friendly acquaintances without any drama. That assumption turned out to be very wrong. At first, the night seemed mostly normal. We were all drinking, talking, laughing, and moving between bars like college students usually do after stressful exams. But as the night went on, he got way too drunk. Not fun drunk, not goofy drunk, aggressive drunk, loud, embarrassingly loud. He started making comments related to me ending things with him, and even though he was trying to disguise them as jokes, it was obvious there was real bitterness underneath them. People around us had started staring because of how loudly he was talking, and I remember feeling increasingly uncomfortable trying to calm him down. I kept quietly telling him to lower his voice, but alcohol had completely destroyed whatever filter he normally had. Eventually, I decided we needed to leave. So me, my friends, and him all started walking back toward my apartment. The entire walk there felt tense. He kept rambling loudly while I tried to keep the situation under control. My friends were clearly uncomfortable too, but everybody was hoping things would settle down once we got back home. The problem was he had arrived on his motorcycle. By the time we reached my apartment, he was in absolutely no condition to drive. There was no way I was going to let somebody that drunk get on a motorcycle in the middle of the night. So despite how awkward things already felt, I told him he could sleep on the couch for the night. At the time, it felt like the responsible thing to do. Honestly, if the story had ended there, I probably would have forgotten about the whole situation eventually. But things got strange almost immediately after everybody tried going to sleep. One of my friends was staying in my room and sleeping on a futon while I took the bed. We had both been drinking. We were exhausted from midterms and going out all night, and all we wanted was sleep. Then the knocking started. At first, I assumed something important had happened. I opened the bedroom door, and there he was, standing outside asking some pointless random question. I do not even remember what it was about. Something stupid and unnecessary. I answered quickly and told him good night again. A few minutes later, another knock. This time it was another random comment. Then another knock. Then another. It kept happening over and over again. Every time I started drifting towards sleep, he would come upstairs and knock on the door again. Sometimes he just wanted to say something meaningless. Sometimes he asked bizarre questions that made no sense. Sometimes he just stood there talking. After about the fifth interruption, within roughly an hour, I finally got frustrated enough to firmly tell him to stay downstairs and go to sleep. Eventually, things went quiet. A little while later, I got a text from him saying he had left and apologizing for being weird. Honestly, I was relieved. I figured the problem had solved itself. I assumed he had either sobered up slightly or gotten embarrassed enough to leave, so I finally went to sleep. At some point later in the night, I vaguely remember hearing the beads hanging in my bedroom doorway, rattling softly. I had decorative beads hanging there instead of fully closing the doorway all the time. They made a distinct sound whenever somebody walked through them. But I was drunk and exhausted. I barely reacted at first because I assumed my friend had gotten up to use the bathroom or something. I did not even open my eyes. Then I heard my friend's voice, calm at first, but confused. "Hey, I think somebody's in here." That sentence woke me up instantly. I opened my eyes and saw him standing over me. Not across the room, not near the doorway, directly over me. His face was literally inches away from mine while I slept. Even now, thinking about that moment makes my stomach turn. There is something uniquely horrifying about waking up and finding somebody silently watching you sleep from that close. Your brain cannot process it immediately. For a split second, reality feels completely wrong. I remember feeling disoriented from alcohol and sleep, and pure panic hit me all at once. My body reacted before my brain fully caught up. I shoved him away from me instinctively, while trying to understand what was happening. Thankfully, my friend was much more coherent than I was. She immediately got up and physically forced him out of the room. From what she later told me, he acted strangely calm about the entire thing, which honestly makes it even creepier. No apology. No normal embarrassment. Just this unsettling quietness while she escorted him downstairs and out of the apartment. At some point after that, I apparently passed back out almost immediately because of how exhausted and drunk I was. Before going back to sleep, though, my friend locked my bedroom door. That decision probably saved me from something much worse. The next morning, I woke up feeling horrible, physically and mentally. For a few seconds, I could not fully remember the night before. Then everything suddenly came flooding back. The knocking, the beads, opening my eyes and seeing his face inches away from mine. I got up and unlocked the bedroom door, and immediately saw one of my couch pillows lying on the floor outside my bedroom. That was when the reality of what happened really hit me. At some point after being kicked out, he had apparently gotten back inside the apartment somehow. I still do not know exactly how. Maybe the door had not shut completely. Maybe somebody accidentally left it unlocked while half asleep. But he came back. And when he found my bedroom door locked, he apparently decided to lie down outside it using one of the couch pillows. That image terrified me more than almost anything else, because it meant he had not simply wandered into my room drunk and confused. He came back intentionally. I remember feeling genuinely unsafe afterward in a way I never had before. Up until then, creepy behavior from men had mostly existed as uncomfortable stories other women talked about. Suddenly, it was real. Suddenly, I understood how quickly somebody could go from awkward and clingy to genuinely frightening. I drove to the police station that same day and filed a report immediately. Some people later tried minimizing the situation, because technically he had not physically attacked me. But honestly, I do not care. Waking up to somebody hovering over your sleeping body after repeatedly ignoring boundaries is terrifying enough on its own. And to this day, I still think about what might have happened if I had been alone. If my friend had not been there. If she had not woken up. If the bedroom door had not been locked afterward. That uncertainty stayed with me for a long time. For weeks after it happened, I barely slept properly. Every tiny sound at night made my heart race. The beads hanging in my doorway became especially unbearable because every little movement or draft made them rattle softly. And every single time they made noise, I woke up panicking. For a split second, my brain always thought it was happening again. Eventually, I took the beads down completely. I have never hung them back up. Honestly, I do not think I ever will. Because even now, years later, that sound still reminds me of waking up in the middle of the night and seeing somebody silently standing over me while I slept. And that remains one of the most genuinely terrifying moments of my entire life. A story I heard years ago has stayed with me ever since, and honestly, I think about it more often as I get older. Not because it involved anything supernatural or violent, but because of how unbelievably fast and meaningless it all was. Those kinds of stories scare me in a completely different way than ghost stories or horror movies ever could. It is not the fear of monsters hiding in the dark. It is the realization that life itself is fragile in a way most people try very hard not to think about. The story was about a friend of a friend's fiancé. He was only in his 20s, healthy as far as anybody knew. No serious medical history, no major illnesses, no warnings that anything was wrong. He was just one of those completely ordinary young adults building a future like everybody else. He had plans, responsibilities, routines, people who loved him, and probably 1,000 assumptions about tomorrow just like the rest of us do. Then one day he left the house to buy groceries. That was it. Nothing dramatic. No dangerous weather. No car crash. No robbery. No overdose. No fight. Just a normal day doing one of the most forgettable tasks imaginable. The kind of errand people do automatically, without even thinking about it. You leave the house expecting to come back an hour later with bags of food and continue your evening like nothing unusual happened. Except he never came home. Apparently, he suffered a brain aneurysm while driving. One moment, everything inside his body was functioning normally. And the next moment, something in his brain ruptured. From what I heard, it happened incredibly fast. So fast, there was almost no time for anything at all. No meaningful last words. No dramatic realization that he was dying. No final phone call to someone he loved. Just sudden silence. The detail that really stayed with me was the security camera footage. There was footage from somewhere nearby showing his car driving normally down the road. Completely ordinary. Traffic moving like usual, cars passing, people probably walking nearby without paying attention. Just another random moment in a normal city on a normal day. Then his car slowly pulled off to the side of the road. And that was it. No crash into another vehicle. No panicked swerving, no visible struggle. The car simply rolled over quietly and stopped. When I first heard that part, it honestly unsettled me more than almost anything else about the story. The idea that somebody's entire existence could end in such a small, quiet moment while the world around them continued normally feels deeply wrong somehow. Imagine all the people nearby continuing their day completely unaware. Someone walking into a store, A person waiting at a crosswalk checking their phone, another driver listening to music at a red light, somebody laughing with a friend nearby. Meanwhile, inside that parked car, a life had just ended forever. And most people around probably never even realized it at the time. That image stuck with me because it captures something deeply unsettling about reality. Human beings naturally want stories to make emotional sense. We want tragedy to have structure. We want there to be a reason, a villain, a mistake, some kind of explanation that gives us the illusion life is controllable. But sometimes there is nothing. No evil person caused it. No terrible choice led to it. No warning signs anyone ignored. No dramatic buildup. Just random biology failing without mercy. Honestly, I think that scares me more than almost any horror story ever could. With fictional horror, there are usually rules. Stay out of the haunted woods. Do not trust the creepy stranger. Do not open the cursed door. There is usually some illusion that danger can be avoided if you are smart enough. But stories like this remind you that life itself does not operate fairly or predictably. You can wake up feeling completely normal, leave your house expecting an ordinary day, and disappear forever before sunset. And the worst part is how ordinary those final moments probably felt. He was probably thinking about completely meaningless things right before it happened. Maybe he was deciding what groceries to buy. Maybe he was planning dinner. Maybe he was annoyed about traffic. Maybe he was thinking about work, bills, weekend plans, or what movie he wanted to watch later that night. Completely normal thoughts. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. That part always gets to me because nobody ever knows when they are experiencing their final ordinary moment. People imagine death arriving dramatically. But sometimes it happens quietly in the middle of routine life. 1 second, you exist fully inside the world. The next second, you do not. I think about his fiancée a lot too, even though I never knew either of them personally. Imagine waiting for somebody to come home and slowly realizing something is wrong. At first, you probably assume something harmless. Maybe traffic. Maybe they stopped somewhere unexpectedly. Maybe their phone battery died. Then the silence stretches longer. Calls go unanswered. A strange feeling starts building in your chest, and eventually your entire life changes permanently because of one random biological event nobody could predict or stop. That kind of grief feels especially cruel because there is no preparation for it. Long illnesses, at least, sometimes give people time. Time to say goodbye. Time to mentally prepare. Time to hold someone's hand and say the things you need to say. But sudden death steals all of that away instantly. One moment someone is fully present in your life. The next moment they are just gone. No conclusion, no final conversation, no warning, just absence. The older I get, the more I realize how fragile life really is underneath all the routines and assumptions people build around themselves. Most of us move through life believing there will always be another tomorrow, another phone call, another dinner together, another chance to fix arguments or say important things later. We assume the future exists because our brains need that stability to function. But reality does not promise any of it. A blood vessel can rupture. A heart can suddenly stop. A distracted driver can cross a lane at the wrong moment. And instantly, somebody who existed seconds ago becomes a memory. I think that is why stories like this hit people so deeply even when they do not personally know the victim. It forces you to confront something uncomfortable. Most people spend their entire lives trying not to think about too much. That every person around you is fragile. Your parents, your partner, your siblings, your closest friends, even yourself. All of us are quietly moving through life, assuming we have more time, even though none of us actually know how much we really have. And strangely enough, I do not think stories like this only make life feel frightening. In a strange way, they also make ordinary moments feel more important afterward. Because when you really understand how quickly everything can disappear, small things stop feeling completely meaningless. A lazy conversation in the kitchen, a random text message, someone laughing beside you in the car, a normal dinner with family. Those moments feel permanent while they are happening, but they are not. One random second can quietly become the last time you ever see someone alive without anybody realizing it at the time. And honestly, I think that is one of the most unsettling truths about being human. Not simply that death exists, but that it can arrive so suddenly, so quietly, and so meaninglessly in the middle of a completely ordinary day while the rest of the world keeps moving like nothing happened at all. Quick interruption. I'll keep it short. A lot of people pass through here once and never come back. But the ones who hit subscribe, they're the regulars now. The ones who show up every single night without fail. If you'd like to be one of them, the button's right there. Turn the bell on too, and you'll never have to wonder when the next one drops. That's everything. Story's still going. Let's get back to it. When I was in high school a few decades ago, I dated a girl who was a couple years older than me. At that age, even a small age difference felt huge because she already had a driver's license, more freedom, and seemed much more grown up than I was at the time. She was confident, independent, and used to driving long distances, which impressed me because I had barely even started learning how the world worked outside my own neighborhood. She and her older sister had this routine they did once every month, where they would drive across the state to pick up their dad because of his job. I honestly cannot remember exactly what work he did anymore, only that for some reason he needed them to come get him regularly. From the way she described it, the drive was long, boring, and something they had done enough times that it became normal to them. Most months, the two sisters went together, but one weekend, her older sister could not go. I do not remember why. Maybe work, maybe sickness, maybe some family issue. Whatever the reason, my girlfriend decided to make the drive alone. At the time, none of us thought much of it because she had done the route many times before. It was just another trip. At least that is what everyone thought. Somewhere around halfway through the drive, she stopped at a rest area. And that was where everything went wrong. She later told people she encountered some man there who seemed strange almost immediately. I never learned every detail because, honestly, she hated talking about it afterward, and nobody wanted to push her into reliving things she was clearly trying to survive mentally. But somehow that man abducted her, just like that. One normal stop during a routine drive, and suddenly her entire life changed. The terrifying thing about kidnappings is how quickly they happen. People imagine dramatic movie scenes with loud screams and huge struggles in crowded places. But real life is often quieter and faster. A wrong person notices you at the wrong moment, and suddenly you disappear from normal life completely. For 2 weeks, nobody knew where she was. I still remember the atmosphere around that time. Fear spread everywhere. Family members, police, friends, everybody trying to figure out what happened. Once the FBI got involved, everybody understood how serious the situation actually was. 2 weeks does not sound long when written down, But when someone you know vanishes, every hour feels massive. Every phone call feels important. Every rumor becomes terrifying. People start imagining the worst because usually, when someone disappears like that, the endings are not good. Somehow, though, they found her alive. Even now, I do not know all the details about how they tracked him down or where she was found. I only know she came back physically alive, though mentally it was obvious something inside her had been permanently changed. Afterwards, she barely talked about any of it. And honestly, who could blame her? Sometimes people who survive horrible things do not want to tell the story because speaking it out loud forces them to experience pieces of it again. From what little I understood, what happened during those 2 weeks was bad enough that she spent years in therapy trying to process it. That experience alone changed the way I looked at the world forever. Before then, danger felt distant to me. Kidnappings were things you saw on television or heard about happening to strangers in other places. Afterward, I realized terrible things can happen to ordinary people during completely ordinary moments, a routine drive, a quick stop at a rest area, and suddenly somebody disappears. That realization stayed with me long after the relationship itself ended. But strangely enough, that was not even the only time I saw somebody survive something horrific and somehow keep going afterward. Years later, I had a mother-in-law who worked at a small neighborhood bar downtown. She was already in her 60s back then, but she was tough, hardworking, and one of those people who seemed to know everyone in the area. The bar itself was the kind of place that barely exists anymore. A small local place where the same regulars came in every day. Mostly older men sitting around drinking beer, talking sports, complaining about life, feeding money into the jukebox, and playing pull tabs for hours. Some women came in too, but mostly it was regular neighborhood people who had known each other for years. Everybody recognized everybody there. That was part of why what happened shocked everyone so badly. One night at closing time, there was apparently a man inside the bar who was not a regular. Somehow he managed to hide inside the men's restroom while everyone else left. My mother-in-law did not realize anyone was still inside the building. After closing, she went downstairs to the basement storage area to bring up beer and restock things for the next day. That was when the man attacked her. From what I was told later, he grabbed her when she came back upstairs and immediately started beating her. Not just robbing the place, hurting her, assaulting her repeatedly while keeping her trapped there alone with him for hours. 3 hours. Imagine that. 3 hours trapped inside a closed bar with a violent stranger while nobody outside has any idea what is happening. The man apparently robbed everything he could while he had her trapped there. He went through the machines, emptied money from the jukebox, stole from the cigarette machine, and dug through the register. At some point while stealing money, he accidentally triggered a silent alarm. That mistake probably saved her life. The police responded quickly because the neighborhood was small enough that even the officers knew the regulars and workers there. Apparently, when they arrived, something immediately felt wrong. And honestly, I think they already suspected something bad was happening before they even got inside. When they found him, things apparently got violent very quickly. I was told later that the officers beat him badly during the arrest. Officially, of course, nobody would say that openly. But behind closed doors, people definitely implied the guy was lucky to leave alive after what he had done. And honestly, nobody around felt much sympathy for him after learning who he was. After the arrest, they discovered he was around 30 years old and had spent most of his life in and out of jail. Even more horrifying, apparently he had killed a newborn baby when he himself was only 8 years old. That detail disturbed me deeply because it painted this terrifying picture of somebody who had been broken or violent almost his entire life. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law spent weeks in the hospital recovering. 3 full weeks, at her age especially. An attack like that could easily have destroyed someone emotionally forever. But what amazed me most was how she handled everything afterward. Not perfectly, obviously. Nobody survives trauma like that untouched, but she never completely lost herself. That is honestly the part I still respect so much when I think about her now. She remained herself despite what happened. She still laughed, still talked normally, still interacted with people. She refused to let that man permanently turn her into somebody ruled entirely by fear. I remember feeling incredibly proud of her for that, because surviving something horrible physically is one thing. Keeping your identity afterward is another battle entirely. Trauma changes people, sometimes permanently. Some people become fearful of everything afterward. Others isolate themselves. Others become emotionally numb just to survive mentally. But she somehow held on to who she was. And honestly, seeing both of these women survive terrible things taught me something important about people. The world can be unbelievably cruel and random sometimes. Horrible things can happen during completely normal moments. A stop at a rest area, closing a neighborhood bar after another ordinary night at work. But human beings can also be incredibly resilient in ways that are hard to fully understand until you witness it yourself. Both of those women had every reason to completely collapse emotionally after what happened to them. And yet somehow they kept going, not unchanged, but still themselves. And I honestly think that takes a kind of strength most people never fully appreciate unless they see it firsthand. One time when I was younger, I went on holiday in California with my family. It was supposed to be one of those normal trips where you mostly remember the fun stuff afterward. Sun, long drives, random roadside stops, hiking trails, cheap tourist shops, and all the usual things people do on vacation. At the time, nothing about the trip felt dangerous. It just felt exciting because California looked different from where I lived. Everything seemed bigger somehow. The roads stretched forever. The forest looked wild. And there were huge empty areas where you could walk for ages without seeing another person. One afternoon, me and a friend decided to go wandering through the bushes and woods near where we were staying. We were young enough to think that exploring random places was automatically a good idea, but old enough to go off on our own for a while without adults constantly watching us. We were basically just tramping around with no real plan, pushing through bushes, following dirt paths, climbing over fallen branches, and pretending we were explorers discovering hidden places nobody else knew about. The area was quiet too. Not peaceful quiet exactly, but that heavy kind of silence you sometimes get in isolated, wooded places. You could hear insects, wind moving through trees, and the occasional distant bird. But there were long moments where everything just felt still. Looking back now, I think that atmosphere is part of why the memory stayed with me so strongly. Even before anything strange happened, the place already felt a little off somehow. After walking around for a while, we came across this trailer sitting out in the middle of the woods. Not a campground, not a proper trailer park. Just a single trailer sitting there, isolated by itself, like somebody had dropped it into the trees and forgotten about it. I remember thinking it looked weird immediately. The outside looked old and worn down, like it had been sitting there for years. The paint was faded, There was junk scattered nearby, and the whole place gave off this feeling of being disconnected from normal life. When you are young, though, creepy does not always register as danger. Sometimes it just feels interesting. There was an old guy there, too, along with a dog. I still remember the first moment we saw him because it instantly changed the mood. It is hard to explain exactly why, but something about him felt wrong the second we noticed him. Not in an obvious movie villain way either. He was not covered in blood or acting insane. He actually seemed friendly enough on the surface. That is probably the creepiest part now when I think back on it. He talked to us casually. I cannot even remember exactly what he said anymore. Just normal conversation stuff adults say when they run into kids wandering around somewhere. Asking where we were from, what we were doing out there, whether we were enjoying our holiday. His dog stayed nearby the whole time, too. I remember paying attention to the dog because animals usually made me feel safer around strangers when I was little. But despite the guy acting normal, both me and my friend felt uncomfortable around him almost immediately. It was not one specific thing. It was everything together. The isolated trailer, the strange atmosphere, the fact he lived way out there alone, the way he looked at us, the weird energy around him. Sometimes your brain notices danger before you consciously understand it. Even as kids, we both felt it. The conversation itself was short. We did not stay long. We eventually left and kept exploring elsewhere. But I remember both of us talking afterward about how weird the old man seemed. Not necessarily dangerous, just deeply unsettling in a way we could not explain properly. At the time, we probably laughed it off. Kids do that a lot after something uncomfortable happens. You joke about it, exaggerate it, turn it into a funny story, and move on. Except later we found out who he actually was. I honestly cannot remember now exactly how the information came out. I think adults heard something locally or saw reports about it afterward. But somehow we learned that the old man living in that trailer was supposedly a serial killer. Not just some random criminal either. Apparently, only days before we stumbled across him in the woods, he had murdered someone and fed the remains to his dog. Even now, typing that out makes me feel sick. The second I heard it, every memory of that encounter changed instantly in my head. Suddenly, the weird feeling we got around him made sense. Suddenly, the isolated trailer felt darker. Suddenly, the dog standing there calmly beside him became horrifying to think about. Because the entire time we were standing there talking to him casually, like clueless kids on holiday, this man had apparently done something unimaginably horrific only days earlier. That realization genuinely chilled me. I think what disturbed me most was how normal he seemed at first glance. That is something people always say after meeting dangerous individuals. But it really is true sometimes. You expect evil to announce itself clearly. You expect killers to look monstrous immediately. But many do not. Many just look like ordinary people standing in ordinary places having ordinary conversation. If we had seen him on a street somewhere normal, we probably would not have thought much about him at all. It was the atmosphere around him that felt wrong more than anything else, like some instinct was quietly warning us before we knew why. After finding out the truth, I started replaying the memory over and over in my head. I remembered the trailer sitting isolated in the woods. I remembered his dog. I remembered how uncomfortable I felt standing there. And then my brain would immediately jump to the horrifying thought that the dog had apparently been fed human remains shortly before we met them. That detail especially stayed with me because it transforms every part of the memory into something darker, The dog no longer feels harmless in hindsight. The trailer no longer feels quirky or strange. The old man no longer feels awkward or lonely. Everything becomes contaminated by what you later learn he was capable of. I remember wondering afterward how close we actually came to danger. Were we safe because he was in a calm mood? Because we were kids? Because it was daytime? Because he simply did not feel like doing anything? Or were we never in danger at all and just unlucky enough to cross paths with someone monstrous shortly after a murder? That uncertainty is part of what still bothers me. People like to think danger comes with warning signs loud enough for everyone to notice, but real life often is not like that. Sometimes the only warning is a strange feeling in your stomach that tells you to leave. And honestly, that is exactly what happened to us. Even before we knew anything about him, both of us instinctively wanted to get away from there. We did not discuss it seriously at the time because we were kids, but we both felt the same thing. Something about him felt deeply wrong. I trust those instincts a lot more now. The older I get, the scarier the story becomes, honestly. When I was younger, it sounded almost exciting in a horrifying way. Like one of those crazy stories you tell people at parties because it sounds unbelievable. But now it mostly just makes me uncomfortable, because I understand better how random danger can be. We literally just stumbled across him by accident. No plan, no warning. Just two kids wandering through the woods on holiday, finding themselves face to face with somebody who had allegedly committed an unimaginable crime days earlier. And the truly disturbing thing is that if nobody had ever identified him later, we probably would have gone through life simply remembering him as that weird old guy in the woods. That is terrifying in its own way, because it means there are probably moments in life where we cross paths with dangerous people without ever realizing it. A stranger at a gas station, someone sitting nearby at a diner, a random person smiling politely during a brief conversation. Most of the time, nothing happens, and we never learn who they really are. But in this case, we did learn. And once we knew, the entire memory changed forever. I still picture that trailer sometimes when I think about it. Hidden in the woods, quiet, isolated, that strange heavy feeling in the air. The old man acting friendly while something deeply evil apparently sat hidden underneath the surface. And honestly, the thing that chills me most even now is the fact that when we first met him, we had absolutely no idea who we were standing next to. Before I was born, something happened in my family that everyone still talks about quietly, even now, more than 20 years later. It is one of those stories that has been repeated so many times that every detail feels permanently burned into my memory, even the parts I was technically too young to fully understand. The strange thing is that most childhood memories fade or become blurry with age, but this one never did. If anything, it became clearer the older I got, and to this day, I can still picture everything almost perfectly. During the months when my mother was pregnant with me, my grandmother's aunt was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. From what my family said, it happened very suddenly. One minute she was living her normal life, and then all at once, doctors were giving her terrible news. Pancreatic cancer is one of those illnesses people fear because by the time it is discovered, it is often already too late to stop it. That was the case for her. At first, the family tried to stay hopeful, but eventually the doctors told her there was not much time left. She was apparently given only weeks to live. Everyone around her understood what that meant, even if nobody wanted to say it out loud directly. She understood it too. According to my mom and grandmother, despite being very sick, she stayed surprisingly calm about everything. Of course, she was scared sometimes, and there were difficult days, but she had mostly accepted what was happening. What upset her most was the idea that she would never get to meet me after I was born. My mother was pregnant during those final months of her life, and apparently she talked about that often. She knew there was a good chance she would be gone before I arrived. One day, during a conversation with my mom and grandmother, she said something that at the time probably just sounded emotional and sad. "I'll come back to see him, I promise." Nobody thought much of it then. People say things like that sometimes when they know they are dying. Families hold on to comforting words because it helps them cope with grief. I think my mother and grandmother probably took it as her way of expressing love and sadness about never getting to meet me. Not long afterward, she died, and life moved on the way it always does after funerals. People grieved, memories became stories. Photographs got packed away into albums and drawers, and eventually the family settled into that strange rhythm where somebody is gone physically, but still talked about regularly enough that they never fully disappear from the house. By the time the experience happened to me, I was somewhere between 4 and 5 years old. At that point, my mom and I were living with my grandmother. I remember the house very clearly because it was the kind of place where every room felt familiar and safe during the day, but completely different at night. As a child, nighttime changes ordinary spaces into something strange. Shadows look bigger, hallways feel longer, chairs in dark corners stop looking like furniture and start looking almost human. My bedroom was small and pretty simple. I did not have much in there. The main thing was my bed, which was one of those bunk beds where the bottom part was more like a little den or play area. You could crawl underneath and treat it like a secret hideout. The top bunk sat fairly low, around chest height for most adults, so it was easy for my gran to lift me into bed. I can still picture the layout of the room perfectly even now. Across from the bed was the wall with the window in the middle. To the right side of the room were a few toys and teddy bears scattered around. And to the left, near the wall facing the bed, was a black chair. That chair is important because even now as an adult, I still hate sleeping in rooms with chairs facing the bed. I always move them or throw clothes over them without really thinking about it. People laugh when I explain why, but the feeling never left me. The night this happened was stormy. I know that sounds like every cliché ghost story ever told, but it genuinely was. Heavy rain hammered against the windows, wind rattled outside, and thunder kept rolling through the sky loud enough to wake me up repeatedly. The weather alone made the whole night unsettling. I remember my gran putting me to bed that evening. She lifted me up onto the top bunk, tucked me in, said goodnight, and turned off the light before leaving the room. Everything was normal. At first I tried to sleep, but the storm kept waking me up over and over. Every child knows that strange half-awake feeling during thunderstorms where you drift in and out of sleep all night long. 1 minute you are dreaming. The next, you are staring into darkness, listening to rain hit the windows. At some point during the night, I woke up facing the wall beside my bed. Still half asleep, I rolled over. And there was a woman standing beside the bed. What still unsettles me about the memory is how calm the whole thing felt at first. There was no screaming, no dramatic shock, no feeling of terror immediately. I was little, exhausted, and only partly awake. I remember looking at her almost casually. She was smiling at me. Not a creepy, exaggerated smile, just a quiet, calm smile. And she was completely silent. I remember staring at her for a few moments without really processing anything strange about the situation. Kids accept impossible things much more easily than adults do. If something unusual happens, they often do not immediately panic because they have not fully built those boundaries yet between what should and should not exist. So half asleep, I simply looked at her and said goodnight. Then I rolled back over and tried to go back to sleep. That part always sounds ridiculous when I tell people. But it is true. I genuinely did not think much of it at first. My brain almost treated her presence like it was normal, like an adult checking on me during the night. But after a few minutes, I realized I was still awake. Something about the room felt different now, so I turned back over again. This time, the woman was no longer standing beside the bed. She was sitting in the black chair facing me, still smiling, still completely silent. That image has stayed with me my entire life, more clearly than almost any other childhood memory. The dark room, the sound of rain outside, the faint light from the window, and this woman sitting calmly in that chair facing the bed as though she had simply moved there while I was turned away. I remember staring at her again for several seconds, and somehow, even then, I still did not feel frightened the way you would expect. Confused, maybe. Curious, sleepy, but not terrified. I just looked at her quietly. Then eventually, I lay back down and went to sleep. That is the entire encounter. No voices, no movement, no threats. Just a silent woman smiling at me in the middle of a stormy night. The truly disturbing part did not happen until the next morning. I woke up normally and went downstairs into the living room where my mom and grandmother were sitting together looking through photographs. Some were recent family pictures, while others were older photographs from years before I was born. Families do that sometimes without any reason, especially when talking about people they miss. I sat down near them while they flipped through the photos. Then they came across a photograph of my grandmother's aunt, the woman who had died before I was born. The second I saw the picture, I recognized her immediately. Without hesitation, I said something simple and completely innocent. "Oh, that lady was in my room with me last night." My mom and Gran both froze. At first, they probably thought they misunderstood me. But when I repeated myself and pointed at the photograph, the mood in the room completely changed. Because according to them, the woman in that picture was exactly the same woman who had promised before dying. I'll come back to see him, I promise. What makes the whole thing so unsettling for my family is the fact I had supposedly never seen a picture of her before that morning. She died before I was born. I was very young. Her photographs were not hanging around the house constantly, where I could study them. Yet according to my mom and grandmother, I identified her immediately. And not only identified her, I calmly explained that she had been sitting in my room the night before. My family is still disturbed by it more than 20 years later. Even now, if the story comes up during family gatherings, everyone gets quiet afterward. My grandmother especially always looked uncomfortable discussing it because she insists my reaction that morning was completely casual and genuine. I was not trying to scare anyone. I was not telling a made-up ghost story. I apparently said it the same way a child might casually mention seeing a relative at the grocery store. That is what frightened them most. To this day, I still remember the woman clearly. Not perfectly detailed like a photograph, but enough that the memory feels real. I remember her smile. I remember her silence. I remember the feeling of waking up and seeing her beside the bed. And most of all, I remember turning over later and seeing her sitting in that chair facing me. People have tried explaining it over the years. Some say it was just a dream mixed with childhood imagination and later influenced by family reactions. Others think maybe I had seen the photograph somewhere before without consciously remembering it. Some say thunderstorms and interrupted sleep can create strange half-dream states where children imagine things vividly. And honestly, maybe they are right. I cannot prove otherwise. But what unsettles me is how crystal clear the memory still feels even after all this time. Most of my memories from being 4 or 5 years old are vague fragments, tiny pieces of moments. But this stands out with unnatural sharpness. The room layout, the weather, the chair, her smile, the silence. All of it remains incredibly vivid. And even stranger, I never remember feeling threatened by her presence. If anything, the feeling was oddly calm. That almost makes it creepier somehow because it felt so normal in the moment, despite clearly not being normal at all. Still, no matter what explanation people give, one thing definitely stayed with me afterward. I cannot sleep comfortably in rooms with chairs facing the bed. Even now, as an adult, if I wake up during the night and see a chair sitting in darkness facing me, my brain instantly goes back to that room. I imagine somebody sitting there quietly watching. It is completely irrational, but I cannot help it. That black chair became permanently tied to the memory. And honestly, maybe that is why the story still bothers me after all these years. Not because it felt violent or evil, but because it felt real, quietly real. The kind of experience that slides into your life gently and leaves you questioning things forever afterward. I still do not know what happened that night. Maybe it truly was my grandmother's aunt keeping the promise she made before she died. Maybe it was a dream shaped by coincidence and childhood imagination. Maybe it was something in between. All I know is that I remember it clearly as crystal even now, more than 20 years later. And every single time I wake up in a dark room and notice a chair facing the bed, a part of me still expects to see a silent woman sitting there smiling back at me. Back in 2017, I was running a small concert photography publication with a few other people, and we were basically building the whole thing from nothing. We did not have big investors, major sponsorships, or a huge media company behind us. Everything was bootstrapped. Every trip, every hotel room, every camera upgrade, every press pass, every flight, every meal on the road came out of whatever money we could scrape together. It was exciting, exhausting, stressful, and honestly, one of the most fun periods of my life at the time, because it felt like we were chasing something real. That year, we got approved to shoot an iHeart Music Festival in Las Vegas. For us, that was huge. Getting credentials for events like that felt like proof that maybe the publication was actually becoming legitimate. I still remember how excited everyone was preparing for the trip. We packed gear carefully, checked batteries over and over, argued about lenses, organized schedules, and tried to plan everything as cheaply as possible because we genuinely could not afford mistakes. Vegas itself always feels strange when you arrive. It looks artificial even in daylight. Huge hotels rising out of the desert, giant screens everywhere, music blasting constantly, tourists wandering around at all hours, people drinking before noon, exhausted workers standing outside smoking cigarettes under neon lights. The whole city feels awake 24 hours a day, like reality operates slightly differently there. The festival grounds were massive too. Open spaces surrounded by hotels, stages, lights, fences, equipment, and crowds moving everywhere. As photographers, we spent most of the time thinking practically rather than emotionally. Where is the best shooting angle? Where is the light coming from? Which lens should I use? How do I move through the crowd fast enough to get to the next stage? You become weirdly focused on tiny details while giant concerts happen around you. I took hundreds of photos during that trip. Crowds with hands in the air, fans screaming, performers under stage lights, security guards watching barricades, people sitting on shoulders trying to see over everyone else, the usual concert chaos. And in the background of many of those photos, almost casually sitting there like part of the scenery, was the Mandalay Bay Resort and Casino. At the time, it meant absolutely nothing to me beyond being another Vegas hotel in the skyline. That is the creepy thing about hindsight. Certain details only become horrifying later. After the festival ended, we headed home because we simply could not afford to stay longer. That was the reality of running an independent publication. Every extra day in Vegas meant more hotel costs, more food costs, more transportation, more everything. We talked briefly about staying around longer because there were always more events happening, but financially, it just was not possible. So we left. About a week later, I was at home scrolling through Twitter when everything started exploding online. At first, it was confusion, videos, people screaming, posts saying there was an active shooter in Las Vegas. Then more footage started appearing almost immediately because it was 2017 and everyone had phones out constantly at concerts by then. Videos of people ducking behind barriers, crowds running, the sound of gunfire echoing across the festival grounds, panic spreading through thousands of people at once. The shooting at the Route 91 Harvest Festival shooting had started. And then I realized where it was happening. The exact same fairgrounds. The exact same area where we had been working only a week earlier. I remember this horrible cold feeling running through my body when that realization fully hit me. Because suddenly all the footage online stopped looking like random news clips from somewhere far away. I recognized the layout. I recognized the fencing. I recognized the camera angles people were filming from. I recognized sight lines between the crowd and the hotels around the venue. And there in the background again was the Mandalay Bay Resort and Casino. Only this time, it was not just part of the scenery anymore. People were being shot from there. I think what unsettled me most afterward was going back through my own photos from the I Heart Festival. In several of them, the Mandalay Bay is visible in the exact background. Perfectly ordinary concert photos suddenly became deeply disturbing because now I knew what would happen there days later. I could literally compare my own perspective as a photographer to videos uploaded during the shooting. Some of the places people hid. Some of the areas where crowds ran. Some of the angles where terrified concert-goers filmed. I had stood in some of those same spots with a camera hanging around my neck only a week earlier. That thought genuinely messed with me for a while. Not because I thought I was supposed to be there or anything dramatic like that, but because the difference between safety and catastrophe suddenly felt terrifyingly small. The only reason we were not there during the shooting was money. That was it. Not careful planning, not intuition, not some life-changing decision. We simply could not afford another week in Las Vegas. That realization changes the way you think about randomness. People often imagine life-changing moments happening because of huge, meaningful choices. But sometimes survival comes down to something incredibly ordinary. A budget issue, a delayed flight, a canceled plan, a decision to leave early because hotel prices are too expensive. If our publication had been slightly more successful financially at the time, there is a good chance we would have stayed longer chasing more opportunities. And then we might have been there. That is the kind of thought that sticks in your head late at night. The videos from the shooting were horrifying on their own, but seeing them after physically being there recently made everything feel far more real. I knew how exposed those grounds were. I knew how packed concerts became there. I knew how difficult it could be moving through dense crowds, even under normal conditions. Watching people run in panic through spaces I recognized felt surreal in the worst possible way. And the sound in those videos still bothers me. At first, many people in the crowd reportedly thought the gunfire was fireworks or sound equipment problems because concerts are loud environments already. That detail has always haunted me because it shows how slowly human brains sometimes process impossible situations. People were trying to understand what they were hearing while others around them were already getting hit. Then panic spread all at once. Thousands of people trying to escape. Confusion everywhere. No clear understanding yet of where the shots were coming from. Just fear. I remember staring at my own photographs afterward almost obsessively, zooming into backgrounds, looking at windows, looking at rooftops. Not because I thought I would see anything important, but because my brain was struggling to connect the ordinary festival environment I remembered with the mass killing that happened afterward. It felt wrong that the same place could hold both memories so close together. 1 week earlier, music, lights, photographers, fans singing along, drinks spilling, security yelling directions, people taking selfies. 1 week later, chaos, gunfire, bodies, sirens, panic, death. That contrast is honestly what disturbed me most. Places do not look evil beforehand. Nothing about those festival grounds warned anyone what was coming. People attended concerts there expecting exactly what we experienced during the iHeart Festival. Noise, excitement, crowds, exhaustion, music, maybe sunburn, maybe hangovers afterward. Nobody walked into that venue expecting it to become the site of the deadliest mass shooting committed by an individual in modern U.S. history. And yet it happened anyway. Afterward, I think everyone who had recently been there felt some version of the same unease. That strange feeling of proximity to tragedy. Not survivor's guilt exactly, because I was never actually there during the attack, but awareness of how thin the line can be between normal life and disaster. I still have those photos too, and honestly, they feel eerie now in a way they never did before. Perfectly ordinary festival shots permanently changed by context. Every visible glimpse of the Mandalay Bay now carries weight it did not have when I first edited the images. At the time, it was just another Vegas background. Now it feels like looking at a photograph taken moments before a storm nobody saw coming. That is probably the scariest thing about events like that. Not just the violence itself, but how normal everything looked right before it happened. Thousands of people laughing, drinking, singing, filming performances, and making memories while completely unaware that within days that same space would become associated with horror forever. And honestly, realizing how close random circumstance brought you to something like that changes you a little bit. It makes the world feel less stable afterward. You start noticing how many moments in life depend on tiny decisions and pure chance. A lack of money kept us from staying longer in Vegas. And because of that, we were not standing in those crowds when the shooting began. Back when I was in college, I had this guy friend who I genuinely liked spending time with. He was one of those people who seemed easygoing, funny, and harmless. The kind of person you could sit around with for hours just talking about random things, watching movies, joking around, or hanging out between classes. Nothing about him ever made me feel unsafe. If anything, he seemed kind of soft-spoken compared to a lot of other guys on campus. But there was one problem. One of his closest friends gave me the creeps from the very beginning. Sometimes you meet somebody and your instincts react before your brain fully understands why. That was exactly how it felt with this guy. I could never point to one huge, obvious reason at first. He was not openly threatening. He did not immediately say anything horrifying to me. But there was just something deeply wrong about him. The way he looked at people, the energy around him, the way the atmosphere changed when he entered a room. And the strangest part was how different my friend acted whenever this guy was around. Normally, my friend was relaxed and nice, but around this other guy, he became tense, louder, more aggressive somehow, like he was trying to impress him or avoid setting him off. It was subtle at first, but after noticing it a few times, I started avoiding situations where the creepy friend would be present. I would still hang out with my actual friend, just not if the other guy was there too. At the time, I thought I was probably overreacting. College is full of weird personalities. Some people are intense. Some people are rough around the edges. Some people are involved in dumb drama constantly. I figured maybe this guy was just one of those people who enjoyed intimidating others because it made him feel important. Then things escalated. At some point, the creepy friend got into a violent fight with another guy and beat him so badly he ended up in the hospital. I never learned every detail about what started it, but it was serious enough that he got expelled from school afterward. Honestly, when I heard he was gone, I felt relieved. Not because I was personally involved in what happened, but because it felt like the problem had removed itself from my life. No more awkward tension whenever I visited my friend. No more weird vibes. No more feeling uncomfortable around somebody who made my instincts scream at me every time he walked into the room. Or at least that is what I thought. Sometime later, my friend invited me over to hang out one evening. It seemed normal enough. We had done that plenty of times before. Watch TV, talk, waste time the way college students do when they are avoiding responsibilities. So I went over. At first, everything felt completely ordinary. We were sitting around watching television and talking casually. Nothing felt off. No weird tension. No signs that anything bad was about to happen. That is honestly part of why the whole memory still scares me. There was no build-up. No dramatic warning music. Just an ordinary evening turning terrifying in a matter of minutes. At one point, my friend said he was stepping outside to smoke. I stayed inside alone watching TV while he went out. A couple of minutes later, the front door opened, and the creepy guy walked in. The second I saw him, my stomach dropped. I had no idea he lived there too. Apparently, after getting kicked out of school, he had been staying there the whole time. Nobody had mentioned it to me. My friend had never warned me. So suddenly, I was sitting alone inside a house with somebody I already deeply distrusted. Somebody who had literally hospitalized another person in a violent attack. I remember instantly feeling trapped even before anything actually happened. But I tried to stay calm. I figured maybe I could just avoid interacting with him until my friend came back inside. So I mostly ignored him and sat there waiting. Eventually, my friend returned from outside, and for a brief moment, things seemed okay again. Then everything exploded. Apparently, during the time after getting expelled, creepy guy had started dealing drugs. I had absolutely no involvement with any of that. I did not buy drugs from him. I did not even really use drugs myself. But suddenly, he started accusing me of stealing from him. At first, I thought he was joking. Then I realized he was serious. His whole demeanor changed almost instantly. The room went from uncomfortable to dangerous in seconds. He became aggressive, angry, paranoid, pacing around and insisting something was missing. I kept telling him I had no idea what he was talking about, and that I did not even do drugs. But he would not let it go. I decided the smartest thing to do was simply leave. So I stood up and headed toward the door, and then he stepped directly in front of it. That moment is burned into my memory because it was the exact second I realized this situation might become genuinely violent. Up until then, I still thought maybe it was just a misunderstanding or some paranoid accusation that would calm down. But when he physically blocked the exit, the atmosphere changed completely. Then he turned toward my friend and said, "Grab her." What horrified me most was that my friend actually obeyed him. To this day, that might honestly be the part that disturbed me more than anything else. Not the creepy guy himself, because I already expected bad things from him, but my actual friend immediately following the order. Suddenly, the person I trusted was physically helping trap me inside the apartment. I remember this awful sinking feeling in my chest when it happened. Like the reality of the situation finally fully hit me all at once. I was outnumbered. I was trapped inside with two men, one of whom I already knew was violent. The creepy guy got right in my face after that. He started threatening me aggressively, accusing me over and over of stealing from him. I kept denying it because there was literally nothing else I could say. I had not touched his drugs because I had no interest in them in the first place. But he was not thinking rationally anymore. Whether it was paranoia, drugs, anger, or all three mixed together, he had convinced himself I stole something from him. Then the threats escalated even further. First, he threatened to beat me up. Then he threatened to kill me. That part still chills me because of how suddenly it happened. One minute, I was casually watching TV with a friend. The next minute, somebody was standing inches away, threatening my life, while another person physically blocked me from leaving. And the worst part was realizing how quickly people can change when fear, violence, and drugs become involved. The friend I thought I knew disappeared completely in that moment. He was acting almost like a subordinate to the other guy, just doing whatever he said automatically. I do not know if he was scared of him too, high, manipulated, or simply too deep into that world already. But the person sitting beside me, casually watching television earlier, was gone. At that point, survival instincts took over. I stopped arguing. I stopped trying to reason with them. I just wanted to get out alive. Eventually, they demanded to search me. I let them because, honestly, I did not see another safe option. Fighting would have been stupid. Running was impossible with them blocking the exit. So I let them go through my pockets and checked my belongings while I stood there terrified. Of course, they found nothing, because I had never stolen anything from him in the first place. Finally, after what felt like forever, they let me leave. The second I got outside, I got out of there as fast as humanly possible. I do not even fully remember the trip home because adrenaline completely took over. I just remember wanting distance between myself and that apartment immediately. Afterward, I did not speak to my friend for a very long time. And honestly, I do not think people fully understood why it affected me so badly. It was not just the threats themselves. It was the betrayal, too. Realizing somebody you trusted would physically restrain you because another person told them to. That changes how you see people afterward. For a long time, I replayed the situation constantly in my head, wondering how much danger I had actually been in. Was creepy guy serious about killing me? Was it drug paranoia talking? Would they have actually hurt me if they had not calmed down eventually? I still do not know. And honestly, not knowing is part of what makes it scary. Years later, me and my old friend eventually reconnected after he nearly died during a robbery. Life hit him hard after college. And from what I understand, That whole lifestyle eventually caught up with him in ugly ways, but to his credit, he changed a lot afterward. He got his life together, distanced himself from bad influences, and became a much healthier person overall. He is doing much better these days. And strangely enough, reconnecting with him later made me realize something important. People absolutely can lose themselves around the wrong person. That does not excuse what happened at all, but I genuinely think the creepy friend brought out the worst parts of him constantly. Fear, loyalty, drugs, violence, ego, all of it mixed together until he stopped acting like himself entirely. Still, that night taught me something I never forgot. Drugs themselves are not always the scariest thing. What is truly terrifying is watching somebody start valuing drugs, money, fear, or loyalty over human life. Because once someone reaches the point where they are willing to threaten violence or murder over that world, normal morality starts disappearing fast. And the scariest part is how quickly ordinary situations can become dangerous once paranoia and desperation enter the room. One minute you are hanging out watching TV with a friend. The next minute you are trapped inside an apartment wondering whether somebody is actually going to kill you over something you did not even do. When I was in school, there was this one moment that completely changed the way I looked at the building afterward. Before that day, school was just school. Loud hallways, boring classes, teachers yelling at kids to stop talking, backpacks thrown everywhere, people joking around before the bell rang. I never really thought about the history of the place or whether something bad had ever happened there before we showed up every morning. Then one random conversation made everything feel different. I was sitting in class one day, waiting for the lesson to start, when I overheard one of the girls sitting behind me talking to her friend. She suddenly said something like, "Did you hear the story of the girl who died here?" At first, I barely paid attention. Schools always have rumors. Every school has ghost stories, creepy bathroom stories, fake murder stories, weird urban legends students pass around because they are bored. Usually it is nonsense people make up to scare each other. So when I heard her say that, I just assumed it was another one of those stories kids tell to make school seem more interesting. But even though I ignored it outwardly, the comment still stuck in my head a little. Something about the way she said it sounded serious rather than dramatic. Still, I figured it was probably exaggerated gossip and moved on. Then later that same day, I went to my 6th period class. And that is when things got weird. The teacher stood at the front of the room and started introducing the lesson for the day. I honestly do not even remember what the actual topic was anymore, because the second she mentioned the girl, my brain completely locked onto that instead. She told us we were going to learn about a girl who had died in the school years earlier. The second those words left her mouth, I remember feeling this weird shock run through me. Not because I was especially emotional about it at first, but because suddenly the thing I thought was just a random rumor turned out to be real. I remember sitting there thinking, wait, what? The room suddenly felt different after that. When something tragic happens somewhere and you find out later, it changes the way you see the place permanently. Hallways stop feeling ordinary. Empty classrooms feel heavier somehow. Staircases feel quieter. You start imagining events that happened there years before you arrived. The teacher explained what happened. Apparently, many years earlier, after school had ended for the day, a girl and some of her friends were hanging around inside one of the science classrooms. From what I heard, they were playing some kind of game. Probably just kids messing around after school the way students always do when they think nobody important is watching. Then somehow a fire started in a nearby classroom. I never learned exactly how it began. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe something electrical happened. Maybe somebody knocked something over. But whatever caused it, the fire spread fast enough to turn into a disaster. According to the story, all the girls managed to run out except one. And that is the part that always stayed in my head. Nobody seemed fully sure afterward exactly how she got trapped. Some people said debris blocked the exit. Others said she panicked. Some said the smoke became too thick too quickly. But whatever happened, she could not get out, and she burned to death inside the school. Even now, typing, that feels horrifying. Because school is supposed to feel safe when you are a kid. It is one of the last places where you expect something like that to happen. You expect boredom there, homework, stress, annoying teachers, but not somebody dying trapped inside a classroom. Afterward, her parents apparently renamed the school in her honor. That detail made the whole story feel even more real to me. This was not some creepy legend students invented over time. A real girl had actually died there. Her family had suffered through something unimaginable. And now every single student walking through those hallways every day was technically attending a school carrying her name. That thought genuinely got under my skin. I remember going home after school that day, feeling unsettled in a way I could not fully explain. The story kept replaying in my head over and over. Finally, I asked my mom about it because I wanted to know whether it was actually true or just partially exaggerated. And she confirmed it. She knew about the incident, too. The second my mom confirmed the story, it stopped feeling like distant history and started feeling real in a much more uncomfortable way. Adults knew about it, teachers knew about it, parents knew about it. This was an actual tragedy connected to the building I walked through every day. And then my brain made things even worse for me. The girl died upstairs. And both my science classes during 6th and 7th grade were upstairs too. That realization absolutely messed with me because suddenly every classroom upstairs felt suspicious in my head. Every science room looked creepy. Every time I walked those halls, I found myself wondering which room it happened in. Was it one of the classrooms I sat in every week? Was I doing assignments in the exact room where somebody died years earlier? I never asked. I genuinely did not want to know. Some part of me felt like finding out the exact classroom would permanently ruin the area for me. So instead, I avoided talking about it almost completely after that. But the story stayed in my head anyway. What made it especially creepy was how ordinary everything probably felt right before it happened. Those girls were just hanging out after school playing games. They were probably laughing, talking, messing around like kids do every day. Nobody wakes up expecting an ordinary afternoon at school to become the last day of their life. That idea haunted me more than ghosts ever could, honestly. One minute, everything is normal. Then suddenly there is smoke, panic, confusion, and fire. And somewhere in all of that chaos, one person does not make it out. After learning the story, I started noticing how eerie schools can feel sometimes when they are quiet. During the day, they are loud and crowded enough to feel normal. But after classes end and hallways empty out, schools become strange places. Long, silent corridors, flickering lights, locked classroom doors, stairwells echoing when you walk through them alone. Knowing somebody had died in my school made those empty spaces feel even worse, especially upstairs. There were times after that when I stayed late for clubs or projects and had to walk those halls after most students had gone home. And every single time I would think about the story, every noise suddenly sounded louder. A chair scraping somewhere down the hall would make me jump. An empty classroom with the lights off would catch my attention too long. Even though I never actually saw anything paranormal, the knowledge alone was enough to make the building feel haunted in a psychological way. And honestly, I think the reason stories like that stick with people is because schools are places tied so strongly to childhood and routine. We spend years inside them. We build memories there. We think of them as stable places where life just repeats every day. So learning that something truly horrible happened there breaks that illusion. It reminds you that tragedies can happen anywhere. The girl herself became almost myth-like among students too, even though she was obviously a real person. New students would hear whispers about the girl who died upstairs. Some people exaggerated details over time, the way school rumors always evolve. Some claimed certain classrooms felt colder. Others claimed they heard strange noises late after school. I never knew whether any of that was true. But honestly, the real story was already disturbing enough without adding ghosts into it. A child died trapped in a classroom while her friends escaped. That alone is heartbreaking. And weirdly enough, I think that is why I stopped asking questions about it. Some stories stop being entertaining once you realize there was actual pain behind them. There were real parents who lost their daughter, real students who probably witnessed parts of the fire, real teachers who likely never forgot it. That changes the tone completely. Still, even though I avoided discussing it afterward, I never stopped thinking about it entirely, especially whenever I walked upstairs toward science class. There was always this tiny thought in the back of my mind, what if this was the room? And once a thought like that gets into your head as a kid, it becomes very hard to shake. Even now, years later, I still remember exactly how shocked I felt sitting in sixth period, hearing the teacher casually confirm that the rumor was true. One random comment from a student behind me had suddenly turned my completely ordinary school into a place with a tragic history hidden inside its walls. And after that day, upstairs never felt quite the same again.
So that's where we'll stop tonight. Before you go, remember this. Every story you just heard was real. Real people, real nights, and none of them saw it coming. If that got to you the way it gets to most people, do one thing before you leave. Hit subscribe. I post new stories all the time, and I don't want you to miss them. Take care of yourself. I'll see you next time.